WSDQ Dunlap, WEPG South Pittsburgh, The Copperhead, WSDT Soddy Daisy, Chattanooga.
The viewpoints expressed on Liberty Works Radio Network are not necessarily those of the network, its affiliates, or sponsors. This is Liberty Works Radio Network. Now live from coast to coast and around the globe. More real talk, the kind you want, on Liberty Works Radio Network.
And good afternoon. It is the Christian Revolt long overdue radio program with your part-time host, full-time facilitator, Nick Landholdt. Hope everyone is doing well today. Very cold very cold here in West Texas. It's going to be in the 30s today, although it got into the 20s during the night, and for some reason my water well shut down, which is not supposed to happen. But anyway, it did. But we got water back, so I'm happy. But I'm laughing because I know up in the Midwest and Minnesota, I don't consider Minnesota the Midwest. I consider it, I guess, central, north central. But anyway, your temperatures are, like ridiculous. So move down here to West Texas, where the climate is pretty decent in the winter. It does get a little warm in the summer, but heck, it is a dry heat, or fairly dry, so it's not too bad. And let's work together to organize well-regulated militia and take at least Western Texas back, if not all of Texas. But in any case, we've got a special guest today, Michael Hutton. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you, Nick.
Great.
Glad to be on the radio with you.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. Mr. Hutton is with the American Patriot Union. He's a co-founder. And we're going to be talking not only the American Patriot Union and Americans United Against Tyranny, but Christian militia and all kinds of other good topics. If you have a question or comment for Mr. Hutton, give us a call at 410-848-9191. And if you go to LibertyWorksRadioNetwork.com, you can tell your friends and neighbors to listen to the show by clicking the on-the-air button that you can't miss on the home page. And that on-the-air button also has the call-in number for questions, relevant questions, please. Again, that's 410-848-9191. And it's, I always like to say it's Friday, or at least give the date and time. It's Friday, the 8th of February. So if you're listening to this at night, then that's a rebroadcast. So that call-in number is not going to do you any good. We also rebroadcast Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. And if we get enough support, and I get some staff that I could pay, we'd be on more frequently. But in any case, Michael Hutton, tell us a little bit about yourself and what motivated you to get involved or to found American Patriot Union.
Well, thank you, Nick. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the effort. And I always begin telling people that I am really not a special person, that I'm an average American, that I grew up, in a relatively lower middle class family with Christian parents who, my father had a 6th grade education, my mother had an 8th grade education. My father was a decorated World War II hero, fought, flew in out of London, running bombing raids over Germany in the Army Air Corps, and did 2 tours, completed his first tour requirement at 20 missions, and then re-enlisted and fought until the end of the war. And we were raised, my brothers and sisters and I, 5 of us all together, were raised as Christians, and we, all of us, came to know Christ in our youth. But we grew up, we moved to Southern California in the early 60s, about 64. My mother, I was born in Chicago, but my mother had bronchitis, so we moved to Southern California for her health. And I grew up in Southern California at the front of the cultural revolution that took place, the hippie movement, and myself, being influenced by that entire culture. I was a anti-war protester. I was a social activist and a hippie, and all of that, at odds with my father pretty much throughout my teenage years. And I turned 18 the year that the Vietnam War ended, and expected that I would be drafted, but for the end of the war. And so I was one of those young, idealistic Southern Californians who expected that when Ho Chi Minh swept into the South, that he would establish the workers' paradise, and that we would see, the real, beginnings of a revolution that, changed the reality of not just that region, but really the entire world. I was ignorant of Marxism, ignorant of communism, didn't really have any education in the history of Marxist revolution, but was paying attention to what took place in Southeast Asia and witnessed the execution, murder of nearly 6 million people, either at the barrel of a gun or as a consequence of starvation. And the reality of what I saw from afar caused me to really question my own point of view, question the argument for equality, question the ideals that I, had come to adopt, and begin to really study Marxist history, study Marxism, study the history of revolution. And that experience caused me to very quickly become a staunch anti-communist. And I found myself at 19, 20 years old on the campus at UCLA, confronting young guys who were involved in the Red Brigade, involved with Students for a Democrat Society, and having arguments with them from a Christian point of view about the fallacy of their ideology. The process of that education and that experience then led me into working to help people get out of that part of the world, and then later on in the late 70s, working to help people who were trying to get out of communist Cuba, and then not long after that, getting involved with efforts of getting people out of Eastern Europe and out of those communist regimes. That experience then evolved into a political attention that led me to get involved with a lot of different kinds of conservative political efforts, Christian political efforts throughout the 80s. And that eventually started to really shape my thinking when Bill Clinton became president, because much of the rhetoric that I started hearing coming out of the Clinton administration was what I was familiar with as a consequence of my exposure to, Marxist thought and Marxist revolutionary rhetoric. So I really began to become focused as a political activist through that experience, and noticing much of what I had come to understand was the American communist strategy to destroy this country, both through a cultural revolution and through advancing leftist ideological stance of the Democrat Party, I came more and more focused on efforts that were, structured to educate people and bring people into an understanding of, what was really taking place in America. And that experience then led me through the 90s in various ways to really educate myself about the Constitution, looking at Supreme Court cases, because I began to understand that the situation in our country was one that was evolving at a very rapid pace into realities that could effectively threaten the existence of our country. So I then began to really pay attention to, political efforts that were not status quo, conservative Christian speakers who were opposed to even much of what was being proposed by people on the supposed right. And make a long story short, about the time that I really started to think seriously about, efforts means by which we could produce real change in this country, took a sort of a real spiritual turn, because it was about that time that I really began to refocus my life on my Christian faith and looking at the basic reality that the only kind of revolution that could really change America and stop this march to tyranny that we're on would be one that would be a spiritual revolution. I'd moved to the Washington, D.C. area back in the early 80s and was involved in a lot of different, political and activist efforts around D.C. And the real turning point for me was when Barack Obama began his campaign, and listening to the ideology and philosophy that he was espousing, I really began to understand that we were coming to a crossroads in this country where fundamental values, fundamental ideology, American ideology, a thing I like to call Americanism, would come into a crossfire that would really present a giant threat to the future of our country.
How long were you, Michael, in the D.C. area?
I lived around D.C. from '83 until 2012.
Oh wow! Okay, well, I'm sorry we didn't meet. My last 3 years in the Navy, from '85 to '88, was down Indian Head Highway, Highway 210, and the Naval Ordnance Station in Indian Head, Maryland.
Very familiar with that entire area. After near 30 years being there, I actually lived just outside of Reston, between Reston and Sterling, Virginia, for the last about 15 years that I was in that area. So
we're coming up against the break. Let's hold right there, and when we come back, we'll let you finish your kind of a update on how you got started in the American Patriot Union and the whole Christian militia, because I actually got a late start myself. But my guest is Michael Hutton. You're listening to Christian Revolt Long Overdue on the Liberty Works Radio Network. When we come back, we'll start with segment 2 and get deeper into the American Patriot Union.
Is Liberty Works Radio Network enlightening you to the real problems we face in our constitutional republic? Has it helped you to better understand what has to be done to save America from becoming a third world nation? If so, do your part in spreading this voice of truth and enlightenment to your fellow Americans. Join the Liberty Works Radio Network Fellowship. Go to www.libertyworksradionetwork.com for details.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
This is Randall Yearout on jurisdiction. When the U.S. territories applied for admission into the Union as states, the overarching principle that drove this decision was the desire to determine their own destinies and to be removed from what the U.S. Constitution calls the exclusive legislative jurisdiction of the Congress over the properties owned by the U.S. government. When what is now the state of Washington removed itself from this exclusive jurisdiction, it was required to write its own constitution, which would provide for a representative Republican form of government for its citizens, such is the case for every state which joined our Union. Today, our U.S. government officials and bureaucrats have lost sight of this fact and now want to reassert exclusive legislative jurisdiction over the states and turn them into administrative subdivisions as though we were territories again. Sorry, U.S. government, but the Constitution says you don't have that authority. And Americans are beginning to realize that our founders intended for the individual states to either succeed or fail based on their own laws and policies. If the people don't like the way a particular state operates, they can move to another one where they do. The way our federal government operates today, the entire nation either succeeds or fails based on the policies of 535 legislators in Washington, D.C. And from what we can see from its history of failed social policies, I don't think these guys could pour sand out of a boot if the directions were written on the heel. We need to replace the socialist mindset in Washington, D.C. and our state governments with a restored American view of law and government.
This constitutional message has been brought to you by the members of the Constitution Party. Visit us at www.constitutionparty.com.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
Dad, where did the clouds come from?
Well, buddy, that's a good question.
Is this worm a boy or a girl? Why are carrots orange?
Actually...
Dad, why don't you have any hair on your head? How do birds fly? Why is dirt brown? Well, why can't I fly? Are we there yet?
You may not have all the answers, but if they're comfortable coming to you now when the questions are small, they'll come to you with the bigger questions later.
Dad, can I ask you something?
Give your family everything. Give them your time.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting. America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The entire world watched. They watched each step down the rungs of that small ladder, one after another, and waited with great anticipation for that last step.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
At that moment, humanity saw the impossible become the possible, and today the sky is not the limit. Achievement, pass it on.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
Now live from coast to coast and around the globe, more real talk, the kind you want, on Liberty Works Radio Network.
And we're back for our second segment on Christian Revolt, Long Overdue. This is Nick Landholdt, your host, and my guest today is Michael Hutton of the American Patriot Union. If you have a relevant question for Mr. Hutton, give us a call, 410-848-9191. Michael, let's go ahead and ramp up your introduction. You mentioned basically what I gleaned from the first segment is, and I completely agree, we need a Christian revival in this country, what I call R&R, repent and repair, for the the atrocities, the sins of murdering babies in the womb, sodomy, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're definitely on the same page there.
That's right, Nick. My introduction is to the point that God really prepared me throughout a lifetime for the effort that I'm engaged in now. I stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 2009 at Glenn Beck's rally and looked out at a crowd of over 1 million people. And what I understood from that experience was that there was a growing fear and a growing sentiment amongst common Americans, Christian Americans, that our nation was really in trouble, which was very encouraging to me in a way, in the sense that I understood clearly that I wasn't alone in my sense of what was going wrong in America, and was part of the efforts to develop the Tea Party around Washington, D.C. at that time. Was involved with some of the people who rose to prominence in the Tea Party effort around the country. And the first conversations that I began to have with people were based on my experience and based on my understanding of how Marxist leftists were working a strategy to destroy our culture, to take control of the news media, to take control of our education systems, to infiltrate all of our institutions, and to become a force that really directed the narrative, public narrative in America. And as we met together and began having conversations about what the Tea Party was going to be, my first question was, what is the Tea Party going to stand for? What is the agenda? What are we going to try to accomplish? And the response that I got back fairly uniformly was that the Tea Party was going to be a grassroots driven movement, that the agenda would be driven out of that grassroots sentiment, and that it wasn't necessary to develop any kind of an agenda or goals or any kind of strategy. And I said, if you don't take the position that it's important for you to define yourselves and to define your goals, then your enemies are going to do that for you. And I believe that's exactly what took place in the Tea Party, that it was hijacked in many ways by people who, driven by political interests. So as I began to work still with the Tea Party, but looking at forming my own point of view about what needed to take place in America, the vision of the Patriot Union was born. And I realized, as I just said, that the first thing that was necessary was for us to establish a clear enough agenda and a declaration of purpose for the Patriot Union that would be sufficiently focused and yet sufficiently broad to garner the support of tens of millions of Americans. Now, to be clear, the understanding that I came to understand clearly was that the federal government is an entity that functions for its own purpose, that the monster of it is a thing that has become so powerful and so large that no particular political effort or mechanistic political endeavor could be sufficient to transform it. And the interesting thing about the statement from the Constitution Party that played during the break there is exactly to the point of the vision and mission of the Patriot Union. It is clear to me that in order to arrest this forward march to tyranny and to begin instituting the kind of reform to establish a constitutional republic of sovereign states, as the founders intended, that it would take a body of sufficient strength, not involved, not connected through the political apparatus, but that was really driven by average Americans, common Americans, Christian Americans who were all united with a common goal. So I wrote the Declaration of Purpose for the Patriot Union and established in it a clear agenda for the Union to be united around. The stated objectives of the agenda are able to be found on our website, which is www.auat.org. And if you add a /declaration to that, that will pull up the Patriot Union Declaration of Purpose. The Declaration basically covers all of the fundamental institutional changes that need to happen in order to remove power from the federal government and to restore state sovereignty. But the vision of Patriot Union goes far beyond simple political reform. It goes to the point of understanding what we must do in order to become the America that the founders envisioned. Now, this is a point that I've spoken about in essays and in front of many people many times, and that is that our American vision, our American dream, the ideal of a government by the people, of the people, for the people, at the time of its founding was really not a thing that could be established. And the reasons for that are that in order for a government of and by and for the people to exist, the people have to be educated, the people have to be informed, they have to be united around basic understandings, they have to be engaged in the political process, and they have to be about the business of truly governing. They have to understand the basic arguments of liberty versus security. They have to understand that institutional government must remain small, but at the same time, it means that our efforts as a society, and especially as a Christian society, which is critical to the ideals of liberty and justice, must be engaged in performing the functions that maintain a just and free society. There always has been societal need, and we as Christians are charged to be responsible for, the poor, the widowed, and there's a list there that we are commanded to be responsible for, and it has been the role of the church throughout America's history to be that governing agency that is about the business of providing welfare. It isn't institutional government that can do that, because as soon as institutional government falls into the position of making the moral judgments about how to distribute wealth, you end up with tyranny. So I've
always found Davy Crockett's "Not Yours to Give" as one of the best arguments or discussions about why government is not in the business of charity, and what they have done over 100+ years.
Yeah,
gradually take over from the church the business of charity.
It's really important, and that speech that Mr. Crockett gave, following the Civil War, was really one that I see as being the beginning of progressive socialism as an institutional effort in American government. It is, but it's important for the American people to understand and be able to exercise in their understanding the business of government. It means we guide the institutional government to legislate and to enact the laws that are necessary for the maintenance of what is the responsibility of government. But we at the same time understand that outside of that institutional government, that we as a whole society have a responsibility in order to be our brother's keeper and to make sure that the general welfare is promoted. So the vision of Patriot Union is one that really is about many different facets. It's about the business of education. It's about the business of providing the kind of information and news that is necessary for people to govern. It's about aggregating collective power sufficient to begin the reform process of changing the government apparatus and restoring a constitutional republic of sovereign states. It's about the business of presenting a public narrative that really echoes the vision of the founders. And this is what's really essential to that. You're probably well aware that John Adams wrote in a letter to the Missouri militia that our Constitution is only suitable to a moral and religious people. And this is a key point of understanding that I think all Americans have to really get their hearts and their heads wrapped around. Our government intends, out of its respect for individual freedom and individual rights, to permit people to be responsible for themselves. And Adams wrote in that letter to the leaders of the Missouri, Massachusetts militia that if America ever became a place that was not so governed by Christian ideals, that it would become a place that would be literally uninhabitable because our government is not sufficient to restrain the chaos that would ensue. And indeed, isn't that exactly where we are in America today? So we have a mission in front of us as Christians, as patriots, to become a guiding voice in this country. And that means tens of millions of Americans, which I believe there certainly are, who are driven by faith and by understanding, to come together and be a loud and clear vocal and physical presence in the argument of America. So Patriot Union is, I believe, the only way that we restore this country. It is a requirement, an absolute necessity for us as Americans, as Christians, as patriots, to come together, stand together around a basic set of ideals, and to begin to be visible in the public sphere as an argument for the restoration of a constitutional republic. And that's the vision and the mission of Patriot Union. As I said, the vision of the founders was a thing that was literally impossible to achieve at the time of the writing of the Constitution for many reasons. One of the greatest is the fact that we at that time had no means to communicate instantaneously. In order for a nation of 300 plus million people to govern, it would be necessary, and it is possible in the modern world for us to do just that. So we have the ability through social media, through social networking, to communicate with each other across the globe, certainly across the entire country, which means that we have the opportunity through modern technology to assemble and to become a force that is driving the direction of this country. But we must become organized.
When we come back from the break, Michael, we'll talk more about grabbing the technology that is Christians are able to use today, and organizing that so that, as you say, we can take back or restore the constitutional republic and self-govern once again. You're listening to Christian Revolt Long Overdue on the Liberty Works Radio Network. We'll be back after the break.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
It's not easy being a veteran.
Coming back from Iraq or Afghanistan, not everyone understands that. You don't feel the same.
Join us at communityofveterans.org
and connect to others who are going through the same thing.
Because no one knows what it's like to come back unless they were there.
Brought to you by Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America.
I know what you're going through.
I've been there.
And now, for the Institute on the Constitution, here's Michael Anthony Perutka with The American View.
Are you a conservative? Do you consider yourself a liberal? If you find yourself using either of these terms when discussing your political worldview, you may have fallen into a trap. Let me explain. When the president or any elected or appointed official takes his oath of office, he invokes the wrath of God against him if he acts unfaithfully to that oath. Well, this is a serious thing, and so a specific standard is declared. The oath taken declares an allegiance to the Constitution of the United States. The oath does not say, I hereby solemnly promise to be conservative. It does not say, I hereby swear that I will follow what are presently considered to be conservative principles. As you know, these things called conservative principles can vary not only from person to person, but from time to time. And that's the trap. So what's the alternative? Well, we seem to need a fixed standard, don't we? One that isn't slick or squishy, one we can depend on. Happily, it does exist, and it's called the Constitution. It was intended to be a fixed standard and ought to be seen and taught that way. The provisions and principles in the United States Constitution are not so complicated that they have to be left to experts. If they were studied and understood by us all, we could do a much better job of holding our elected representatives accountable to their oaths of office. As an older attorney who has seen the slide away from American and constitutional principles, I am hoping and praying for a return to constitutional understanding and fidelity. This is Michael Anthony Perutka for Institute on the Constitution, bringing you The American View.
This is Rob McQuay for the Institute on the Constitution, and you've just finished hearing Michael Anthony Perutka's commentary on The American View. The views and opinions expressed are not necessarily those of this radio station, and we welcome any comments and suggestions you may care to offer by emailing us at michael@theamericanview.com. If you'd like to learn more about the Institute on the Constitution's work, you can find out more about who we are and what we do at theamericanview.com.
This is Dee Kidd from newswithviews.com. My new book, Taking Politics Out of Solutions, is now available. Why is it nothing changes no matter who you vote for? My book covers the most critical issues eating this country alive, as well as the solutions that are already there that Congress and the agenda-driven media don't want you to know. From the disaster of our economy, why we will never have any economic freedom until the Fed is abolished, trade, the meltdown underway called Obamacare, the truth about Social Security and Medicare, and the fraudulent ratification of the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, a very big issue that affects every American. The answers and solutions are in my book that all Americans need to read because the worst is coming at us like a freight train. To order, please call 1-800-955-0116.
Isn't life an awesome gift? Married couples have the power to co-create an eternal life with God that will last forever. God has also designed us so that we can plan our families effectively, naturally, and without chemicals or barriers. Learn natural family planning in English or Spanish through classes or home study from the Couple to Couple League. Visit ccli.org or call 800-745-8252.
Join the Cavalcade to Freedom, the cavalcade back to constitutional government. Climb on board and do your part to proclaiming liberty throughout the land. Join and support Liberty Works Radio Network Fellowship. To view the strategic plan, to spread the word, and to get information on joining, go to www.libertyworksradionetwork.com or call the fellowship office at 410-857-5444. That's 410-857-5444 to join the Cavalcade to Freedom. America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting. Now live from coast to coast and around the globe, more real talk, the kind you want, on Liberty Works Radio Network.
And we're back for our final segment on Christian Revolt Long Overdue. This is Nick Landholdt, your host and full-time facilitator. I consider myself a facilitator because I like to network and bring like-minded people, like-minded meaning Christian patriots, together to organize and to bring back, restore the constitutional republic. Now, Mr. Hutton, you may not know, I actually prefer the Articles of Confederation, but if we can just get to a point to where we're enforcing the original 1787 Constitution, that would look like, literal freedom to what we have today. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I really love some of the things that I hear when we're at break. One of the quotes that I'll use from what I heard during the break is, "The worst is coming at us like a freight train," and that is so on the mark. We are watching an exponential rise in the assault on values, on the assault on Americanist ideals, on the assault of everything that really, truly we hold dear as Christians and as Americans. And I've been saying this as well for a long, long time. The American Patriot Union will happen. It will be that tens of millions of Americans will come together and stand together, united with a clear focus on what must happen in order to change America. And the reason why it will happen is because they will force us to it. We will very rapidly find ourselves at a crossroads where the challenge is put to us to either conform or to perish. And my argument in response to that is, let's go ahead and put the thing together now so that we've got the ability to affect the change we need to do before it becomes a crisis.
Well, and you were talking about technology. I don't understand why Christians are allowing the what I call antichrist, and that spreads across all religious lines, because Christians who are not acting like Christians or who reject the Gospels, do not live the Gospels, they can be antichrist as well. But why do we allow the technology? I mean, we're being censored all over I'm right currently in Facebook jail myself for quote-unquote hate speech. And it's just ridiculous when we could use that technology to our benefit.
That's absolutely right. The power of social networking has yet been untapped. Looking at it for what it's fundamentally capable of doing, it permits us the ability to assemble as a nation. It permits us to assemble as a patriot and Christian community. It gives us the opportunity to come together, to share information, and to educate ourselves, to educate others in ways that never was possible before. So we, for the first time in our history, have the vehicle that's necessary in order for us to become truly a government by the people. So as I began to really, ponder what it was that was necessary to come into existence in order to make the kind of changes that are necessary to do the gigantic tasks, for example, again, going back to the comments during the break, of removing the Fed, of taking power and authority away from the federal government and returning it to the states, of all these massive changes that need to happen in order to restore liberty and justice in this country. The power of social networking is the vehicle by which we can do that. So part of the vision of the Patriot Union is to build a social networking environment that has some very powerful mechanisms in it. What social networking provides, not in addition to being a place to assemble, it provides us with a direct the opportunity to produce a direct window between ourselves, our assembly, and the institution of power wherein we need to affect change, not just in the government, but in our news media, within our education systems, within many of our societal welfare systems, in all things that are authoritative in America. We have the ability through social networking to begin to exercise power as an aggregate to affect change in those areas. When the Patriot Union's social network system is set up fully, what will be possible for our members to do is when they are in their timelines commenting on the issues of the day, on the issues that are presented to them by friends and family, as they offer their opinions and their responses to these events, we are going to link that to a powerful back-end tool that actually delivers that communication to the people to whom it needs to be delivered. So, for example, let's say you're on Facebook and somebody posts something about legislation relevant to the Second Amendment, to gun rights, or some thing that really sets you off, and you respond back and say, I disagree. I don't think that law should be passed. Well, that response in our social network will fire off communications to the people to whom it matters. Suddenly, an aggregate of millions of Americans that are gathered together in the Patriot Union will begin to have a voice in a very direct and facile way to affect change at all levels of government. And this system is intended to expand out from not just national issues, but state issues and local issues right down to your school board. And in addition to that, beyond the arena of politics into all of the other institutional authorities that we need to affect the kinds of changes and reforms that we all want to see happen. The ability to aggregate in boycott, the ability to aggregate in initiatives, the ability to aggregate into all methods of political and activist reform is given to us through this system of social networking. And so ultimately, what the Patriot Union website and its social network will become is a clearinghouse for all patriotic activities to work as a union and to aggregate power and affect change. Whatever efforts are currently being endeavored to reform immigration, to reform education, to promote family values, to reform curriculum in our schools, all those things suddenly will become empowered by the millions of voices that are aggregated in that community. The ability to bring that power into the public arena is a thing that is effectively the real instrument of a reform that this country must discover and begin to employ. We've got a reality that we now suffer, as you just pointed out, where we are being marginalized, where we're being silenced, where we're being censored, and we've got to overcome that. And this is how we do it. This is the way that we begin to become the guiding force in this country. When the voices of tens of millions of Christians and patriots come together and begin to be heard in the public sphere, it will have an effect that is essential to enlightening and informing the entire rest of the body of Americans. But the Patriot Union vision even goes beyond that, because by aggregating these tens of millions of good Americans into a common union, we then also begin to have the opportunity to aggregate resources to affect real change in terms of legal battles, in terms of influencing the public narrative through communication systems. We begin to even have the opportunity to, in the ideal, end goal of it, to begin to build our own schools, to begin to build our own, community efforts, to do things in a way that we focus our resources and our voices into demonstrating what really America is supposed to look like. The rising expression of that idealism, of what is fundamentally Americanism, will be the thing that transforms this country. And when millions of Christians begin to work together, Jesus said, when two or more are gathered in my name, what happens when millions are gathered in his name? We can become a power in this country, taking care of the responsibilities that we have as a society in much the same way that the church did, prior to the development of progressive socialism in our government. That is,
Michael,
really
we have about 3 minutes left. I want to make sure people know where to reach you and the American Patriot Union, and also briefly mention about the Christian militia, which is near and dear to my heart.
Well, this is another aspect of really the vision of Patriot Union. The Christian militia, our intention is to establish a well-regulated militia in every county, in every state in the Union. This is the means by which that the founders intended to really do the business of providing security. And as violence and the danger of it grows in our world, the necessity for that will become more and more apparent. And the exercise of that right in demonstrating the efficacy of that effort to really provide security is one that also will transform the perspective of what America is and what America should be. So the Christian militia is an effort that was started by a friend of mine who lives over in Houston, Jerry Quintana, and we are working hand in hand to expand that that vision and that requirement first through Texas. Texas fortunately has a set of laws that are on the books that provide the opportunity for the state to provide resources for and help in the development of that well-regulated militia in every county. There's a set of code that actually was written under the same set of code that our Department of Public Safety was formed out of, that calls for those official reserve militia units to exist in every county in the state of Texas. And actually there are some 35 states that have similar legislation on the books. So we are, the entire vision of the Patriot Union is a thing that is impossible for me to try to communicate in a few hours even, and really it is a thing that as people working with me over years have begun to really understand, they have grown in their enthusiasm and their excitement for what this thing can be. And I encourage everybody who's listening to go to our website. The website we have up right now is a temporary website. We will be launching a new website within the next few weeks that provides an expanded explanation of the vision of Patriot Union. It also will provide a social network, which is a rudimentary form of the thing we ultimately will build, and also begin to provide the kind of resources and libraries that are necessary to help activists in their efforts, regardless of what patriotic endeavor they're engaged in.
Well, Michael, I appreciate you again taking the time to come on. Folks, go to AUAT.org. That stands for Americans United Against Tyranny. AUAT.org. You can register. It doesn't cost anything to join the American Patriot Union and get updates and what have you. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about Christian militia, because as the Second Amendment says, the well-regulated militia is necessary to a free state. Michael, thank you so much. Godspeed to you. And we'll be back next week on Christian Revolt Long Overdue.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
If I could have a heart-to-heart with my dad.
If I could have a heart-to-heart with my mom.
I'd probably talk about girls.
We'd probably talk about girls.
Anything boys, school, clothes.
You'd be amazed at what they'll talk about if you give them the chance.
If I had a heart-to-heart with my dad.
If it were real heart-to-heart, I'd tell my parents what I'm going through.
I'd probably talk to him about growing up. I'd probably tell my dad that I wish we'd do more stuff together.
I don't think it has to be a heart-to-heart. I just want to talk.
Give your family everything. Give them your time.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
This is Randall Yearout on Leaders. Our government leaders swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States before they're allowed to exercise the powers of their offices. This oath automatically requires those office holders to act as a check on usurped or abused power among those within any branch of the government. Why is it, then, that when the Congress assumes for itself powers reserved by the Constitution to the states or the people, the President doesn't object with the defense of the Constitution and refuse to execute unlawful legislation? Or when the President creates Soviet-style czars to violate the public rights, why doesn't the Congress speak up? Or when the court begins striking down the laws of the Union States in violation of the public rights and in favor of international norms, why don't the other two branches bring misdemeanor charges against those offending judges? It appears that our leaders in government think that a non-intervention policy on another branch's behavior is more virtuous than executing the oath they took to support and defend the Constitution. James Madison said in Federalist Paper 51 that if men were angels, no government would be necessary, and that if angels were our governors, no Constitution would be necessary. Our Constitution is necessary, however, and our public officials are proving to us the very reason this is so. The Constitution outlines the restricted powers we, the people, gave to our governors. For our leaders to disobey them is to break the supreme law of the land, which is to be dealt with by impeachment and removal from office. I think the only way to effectively ensure the reinstatement of our American form of law and government is to replace nearly every last congressman with one who will honor his oath.
This constitutional message has been brought to you by the members of the Constitution Party. Visit us at www.constitutionparty.com.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
It doesn't take sight to reach the top. It takes vision. Eric Weinmayer knew the risks. Less than 1,200 people had ever conquered Mount Everest, and more than 175 had died trying. But still he climbed, not seeing the terrifying drops or the fear on other faces. And when he reached the summit, he didn't even see the view. Because Eric Weinmayer is blind. He proved it doesn't take sight to reach the top. It takes vision. Pass it on.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting. America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.
She knows a hollow from a double up. She does snapbacks, backsides, shoots the curl. Bethany Hamilton knows everything about surfing. She just didn't know about the shark. But just months after the attack, and with only one arm, the 13-year-old surfs again. And now she's ripping it better than ever. So next time life puts a little fear in you, just think of Bethany Hamilton hanging 10 on top of a heavy wave. That's real courage. Pass it on.
America, born to freedom. The Liberty Revolution is on. Liberty Works Radio Network. Truth in broadcasting.